My guest this week is Aniket Sardana. Aniket is a vet with a passion for island wildlife and spends much of his life travelling to remote and isolated islands around the world. While working as a vet there, he gets to work on some strange and curious creatures, including penguins, giant Galapagos tortoises, and even elephant seals. He's also a very accomplished photographer and videographer, with lots of his work being published in books, magazines, and online media. When not travelling, Aniket loves nothing more than visiting his allotment and growing all sorts of different vegetables. I truly hope you enjoy listening to me interview Aniket about his amazing travels and some of the wonderful things he's managed to photograph. You'll also get to hear Aniket's 5 songs and his reasons for picking them. Welcome, Aniket, and really appreciate you taking the time out to chat to me this morning.
Thank you, Peter. It's good to speak to you.
Now, we've met a few times. You're based over in the UK and travelled out to Australia a number of times now. I know you trained as a vet and zoologist at the University of Bristol, graduating back in 2008. Did you always have a love for animals?
I think it's a question probably every vet gets asked quite a lot. I would say I always had an interest and a fascination in animals and how they work. I think it's hard to be a vet, as a true sort of conventional animal lover, because when you train as a vet, a lot of the work you do, you work with companion animals, but sports animals, with food animals. You learn about food storage, food safety, about abattoirs. You spend a lot of time in abattoirs, actually supervising animals being slaughtered. So actually, being a vet probably isn't the ideal career path for a lot of people that would call themselves animal lovers. I suppose it's about really understanding how animals work and about how they fill their roles and how we help them to fulfill their roles in the context of how they serve us, but in a way that maintains their welfare and keeps them safe and keeps humans safe as well. So quite a detailed definition there. But, I think for me personally, I was always fascinated just by how animals work, just like a mechanic is fascinated by how a car works. I wanted to know what all the little wires were inside and what they all did, and how to fix them when they go wrong. So that was kind of my interest.
Did you have animals growing up that you sort of observe and practice on?
I did actually have a rabbit. I think when I was about 7, I got a rabbit, and I had him for about 8 or 9 years. But that was my only sort of mammalian pet that I had. I think my interest actually started when I was 5. At primary school, our teacher planted a bean, and she put this in the cupboard every day, and every morning she would get it out, and it, it'd grown about an inch or 2 every day. It was growing really fast, and I was completely amazed, and I couldn't believe it. I was really fascinated by it. So my interest actually started with plants, and of course, I went home from school and I said to my mum, our teacher grew this bean, and we've got to get one, and we went to the shops, and I got beans and peas and carrots and radishes, and this was in 1990. And, I grew lots of veg that year. My first year, I remember it really well. And then my interest kind of quickly developed to animals as well, and into wildlife. I think I kind of was fascinated by wild animals because having a pet rabbit, that I fed and looked after and maintained, I was quite fascinated that there's wild animals who just live of their own accord and do the things that we do. So they find their own food and have their young and feed their young and look after them and rear them and teach them to hunt or avoid predators completely independently. That really kind of fascinated me. And of course, all the huge number of shapes and sizes and colors and different environments they all live in. So that's what took me down that path.
What did your parents do? What were their careers?
Totally different. They were both civil servants working in office blocks in London. So nothing like, I was like the outcast in the family. Not the outcast, but I was just totally different to the rest of them. We lived on the outskirts of London. My sister was very much a city girl. She had no interest in animals, in cows and farms and all that stuff. And I was always on the other side. I would always go to sort of Hertfordshire and go out to the woods and lakes fishing with my school friends. My sister would be in the city shopping. We were just total opposites. But I would say my parents, my dad had a lot of animals when he was growing up as a small child, but they weren't really scientists. They weren't anything to do with biology at all.
Right. Okay. You also have a passion for wildlife photography, and you had a tour company for a while, but you use your images in books and things like that. So where did the interest on the photography side of it come from?
So I did a fair bit of photography through secondary school, but around 99, year 2000, I used to help out at a wildcat sort of rescue centre collection in Hertfordshire on my weekends. And I remember taking my camera down on my dad's SLR, film SLR, obviously in those days. Showing, feeling very old now talking about film cameras, but
oh, they're coming back, mate. They're coming back.
And I took a lot of pictures there, and that really sparked my interest in photographing animals and nature, and it really developed from there.
Do you have a favourite group that you like to? I know you sort of said you had a rabbit growing up. I'm sure that rabbits aren't your favourite target for photography.
I mean, I like everything really. I like photographing landscapes. I like mammals, plants as well. I do have quite a big interest in felines, as do many, I guess. I read a few books that kind of really sparked that interest. One was a book called 𝗙𝗲𝗃𝗲𝗃 by Alan Rabinowitz, about his effort to establish the world's first jaguar reserve in Belize, and decided I was fixated on going there after school, and I did. I went there for 3-4 months and stayed with the same family that he stayed with when he was sort of writing the book and doing his research there. And the other was tigers. I read a book by 𝗲𝗃𝗲𝗃𝗲, several of his books actually, about tigers in Ranthambore and other parts of India. And also in 1998, the BBC had a tiger season. It was a whole week of documentaries following different families of tigers in various national parks. And that really sparked my interest a lot as well. So, after school, I spent 3 months mostly visiting tiger reserves in India and Southern Asia, and then 3 to 4 months in Belize looking for jaguars, and the former was certainly more successful than the latter.
Oh, right. Have you had any dangerous encounters out there photographing them?
Do you know that there's a sort of a bit of a misconception with tigers? There are places where they're dangerous. I guess something like the Sundarbans is famous for man-eating tigers. That there's certainly a higher frequency of attacks on people there, or certainly there used to be, maybe less so now. But in general, they're not really aggressive animals. That I wouldn't say they're dangerous in the sense that we think of them as being dangerous. I mean, yeah, they are large, they're predators, and they have that element of surprise. And when you watch them grab their prey and rip it to pieces, you think, well, geez, that's pretty frightening. But actually, they're quite shy. And I remember before I'd actually seen my first one, on that visit to India in 2001, I'd gone up to Corbett Tiger Reserve, which was a fabulous park in the Himalayan foothills, really diverse, got a lot of birds and mammals there. And it was a closed season, but I'd been sent up there there was a conference, a meeting. There was a visitor from the World Bank coming over, and he was visiting some of the park officials, and so I had the chances to tag along, which was rather nice. And we stayed in 𝗀𝗃𝗃𝗃 Forest, the old Forest Rest House, where Jim Corbett, who was a British sort of hunter turned conservationist, is where he used to live. So it was really great to stay in his old house.
Oh, okay.
But during the day when they were having their meetings, I had the free run of the park. So I had a guard with me all the time, with a walkie-talkie and a stick, and they would just say, well, what do you want to do today? And, if I wanted to go off on the elephant, I could do that, or go for a walk or a drive or whatever. I had that freedom. And I remember one day, we decided just to go, myself and one of the rangers, along this path from the rest house through some long grass at 𝗀𝗃𝗃𝗃 to a small waterhole with a watchtower. And these are really popular in Indian parks. You can walk to them or drive to them, and you just sort of climb up the ladders to the top, and you've just got a viewing platform where you can see sort of over the forest or over the grassland and just scan with your binoculars for wildlife.
Yeah.
And we saw some monkeys there and some wild boar and a few birds. And then it got to about 10, 11 o'clock. It was getting quite hot. So we decided to turn back. And we walked back to the house through this, along this dirt track, through sort of long grass. And of course, there were tiger footprints on top of our footprints, all the way, for quite a long section of our walk there. A tiger had followed us not very long afterwards, and these were quite fresh tracks, because they're in dry dust. The footprint loses its crispness quite quickly, so you can tell if it's an old one or a new one. And this tiger had obviously known that we were coming. And what the ranger said to me was, she was probably just heading down to drink at the river. But, tigers are very cautious of people. They don't like to put their back to us. They'd rather that they saw what we were doing rather than we see what they're doing. And so she would have just waited quietly in the grass, probably just a couple of meters away, let us go, and then quietly come behind us and then carried on her way.
Yeah.
But of course, I couldn't believe it, because at this point I'd never seen one. And, when you're in the forest and it's so quiet, it's sometimes hard to believe they're even there. To think this huge striped feline is actually just meters away from you. It's hard to believe it, but the evidence was there. And fortunately, it was just 4 or 5 days later that I did finally get my first sighting from a boat, actually, in the morning, a tiger that had been drinking and was sort of returning back to the forest. But, I'd say, I wasn't, it's not like we were afraid or anything, but it was exciting but frustrating that the tiger was kind of playing games with us. It was there, but didn't show itself. So it was a great memory, though.
Oh, exactly. Other than tigers, what are some of the other memorable animals you've tried to photograph or have photographed?
I love the lemurs of Madagascar, all prosimian primates, in fact. And one of my favorites is the gold-crowned 𝗁𝗂𝗁𝗁, which is a really beautiful creature, very little known. There's a very restricted range in northeast Madagascar. The Inaccessible rail is another sort of very unusual bird. It's endemic to Inaccessible Island, which is one of the satellite islands of Tristan da Cunha. I did some field work there with an RSPB scientist back in 2015, and we saw quite a few of those, and was fortunate to be able to photograph one of them. Tristan albatross as well. There's only a couple of pairs on Inaccessible, so those are the birds we were actually out to look for, and I'll talk about that more later on. But there's just a couple of thousand of those remaining now, so and only a few pairs on Inaccessible, so that was quite exciting to see. I've been quite fortunate to see snow leopards in the wild back in 2013. And they're actually not as difficult to find as you think. It does involve, staying out in the cold for at least a week or so, but there's reasonable chances of seeing them.
Right, okay.
But one of the highlights, I think, has got to be Wilson's bird of paradise. I've tried twice for this bird and was successful the second time. This was back in 2008 on the island of 𝗬𝗂𝗀𝗀𝗀, which is just off New Guinea, off the west coast of New Guinea. Probably one of the most exquisite birds that I can think of.
Fantastic. Okay, we're going to listen to your first song now, Aniket, Man in the Mirror by Michael Jackson.
So I was quite a big fan of Michael Jackson at primary school. He was a very popular artist at the time. And our headmaster was also a big fan, and he played this song quite a bit. And I think it was only later I really thought about the meaning of the lyrics. And I think, to me, what the lyrics say is about self-accountability and about holding yourself responsible for your successes or failures, and really, looking at yourself to try and make yourself better.
Now, getting back to your vet work, Aniket, you worked as a vet on a number of remote islands. I know you've travelled quite extensively with your veterinary work. How did you come about becoming a travelling vet?
So I did have a job once. I finished it nearly 10 years ago and became self-employed. I think for my purpose was the best thing I could have done. And I always wanted to work in the Falklands. Even when I was a student, I tried to inquire about working on farms there at lambing time or that kind of thing. I think I had this interest in photographing seabirds. I used to go to 𝗂𝗏𝗏 Island every year as a student to see the puffins and the gannets and guillemots and various things. But I always wanted to go to the Falklands because I knew about the vast seabird colonies there, the penguins, the cormorants, and the other wildlife, dolphins and sea lions and things. But I didn't want to just go for a week to visit. I wanted to really get my teeth in and sort of live and work there for a while and really get to know it very well. And I made some inquiries about going down in 2011, and towards the end of the year, an opportunity came up. I had to go pretty much straight away, but that was fine. And I loved it. I, really sort of found my feet there. I guess everyone has a destiny of desire and a destiny of fate, and for me maybe it was a bit of both. I wanted to go there, but actually once I was there, it worked out pretty well for me. It's like island vetting it's like extreme mixed practice. So if you think of traditional vetting as it used to be, even when I first qualified, a lot of vets were like James Herriot's. You did a bit of everything. You saw horses and cows and sheep and dogs and cats and budgies, and you treated all creatures great and small.
Yeah.
But the way the industry is moving is more like the medical industry. So vets are becoming more and more specialized. You're an eye vet or an orthopedic vet or a cardiologist or a dermatologist. You don't really have those mixed vets very much now. And specialization didn't really appeal to me, and nor did owning a practice.
Right.
But island vetting, the Falklands is over 700 islands. It's about, including military, about 3,000 to 4,000 people. And when I first went, there were just 2 vets there. So one was away. I would be there. There's now 3, but between the 2 of them, they covered all of the islands. They cover the abattoir. They cover imports and exports, inspecting fishing boats, obviously treating pets, race horses on racing days, with livestock and meat and wool exports. I mean, they do everything.
Yeah.
And when I've been on call there, I've had like 4 phones for the weekend. I've had like my UK phone, my Falklands phone, my vet on call phone, and the biosecurity phone when I've covered biosecurity on call. And I remember, I think in the morning I had someone's cat to see. Then I had a collapsed sheep to look at in someone's garden. And then I had to inspect a crate of cauliflower that arrived from Uruguay. Because that would have been a biosecurity call. And there's a box with like a torch and a penknife, and you sort of just like look into the cauliflower for any spiders or any bugs that might be coming into the islands, and check that it's all okay. So it's really quite diverse work. And of course you do get wildlife in as well sometimes. I've been out with conservation before to investigate penguin chick deaths, and we get wild birds brought in, sort of oiled penguins and fledgling albatross that have got blown off course and been found and brought in. So anything can happen, and I quite like that. And I think I quite like the fact that it's so small that you get to know everyone very well and everyone knows you.
Yeah, and definitely sounds like obviously a completely different scenario to the veterinary practice that we all picture in our mind of being a waiting room full of cats and dogs and budgies, as you said, to a place where anything goes. Or you can be treating someone's sheep or horse one day, and next thing a stray penguin comes up. What's some of the strangest animals you worked on?
Yeah, so I've had petrels brought in. I've had a king penguin come in once with a broken leg. I did once actually in 2013. Was out with my housemate actually, just going for a walk on the local beach just outside Stanley, and we came across a wounded elephant seal pup. And I don't know if it'd been bitten by an orca or sea lion or something, but it was in the way, and people walking their dogs were obviously going to be disturbing it. So we tried to move it to safety, to treat it and then move it to safety. And of course, at the time, I'd been hired by the government of South Georgia. They were commencing their rat eradication in South Georgia. So a load of them were away and had taken one of the Falkland vets. So they'd hired me to replace her. And of course, to save on their accommodation bill, they said, well, you can just stay in one of our houses. So I stayed in, one of the government guy's house while he was away in South Georgia. And of course, he left his car keys behind, which I had. So my housemate, Frin, and I said, well, we've got Martin's keys. So, we just took his Land Rover to the beach and we took a stretcher, and there's some squaddies were down there from MPA, and they came over and gave us a hand, and we basically put the elephant seal on the back of his Rover and drove it into town, into the clinic, and gave it a check over. I mean, obviously, elephant seals can get to 4 tons. This was a small one. It was only about 60 odd kilos, but I got some photographs of it. I mean, in the back of the car, it climbed up on the seats and was trying to look out the window as we drove past people's houses. And I took a picture of it, and it made the front page of the paper there, and it was in the Daily Mail as well.
Yeah.
And of course, someone actually sent a copy of the Penguin News, which is the Falklands paper, to Martin in South Georgia about something else. And he just thought, what's this elephant seal on the back of a car? He thought, hang on a minute, that's my car. He had no idea at all, and was totally shocked to see his car on the front page of the paper with an elephant seal sticking its head out through the window. We treated it and sort of went and released it again. So that was certainly quite a memorable encounter there.
Definitely. And going back to penguins again, I saw a newspaper article a while ago now.
when you were out doing some photography on the Falklands, you had a penguin try and gobble up your GoPro.
Yes, I think that was on 𝗏𝗏 Island. I've been there a few times to work on their livestock, and they're really lovely people that own the island. Usually when I go there, once I've got the work done, in the summer it's not dark till about 11 o'clock at night. So I'll go down to the beaches in the evening with my camera gear and just see what I can find. And there was a penguin colony, I think some Gen 2s high up on a hill, and they would come in from the sea and sort of march in this long lines of birds marching up to their nests. So between sort of waves of birds arriving, I put my GoPro on a little tripod and just put it on a rock alongside this path, this trail they were using to march up to their colony. Then I got back out the way and just watched what happened. So a load of birds came along and were walking up, and a few of them seemed to turn their head and notice the camera as if they'd seen, well, that wasn't there last time we walked past here. And, one of the birds stopped and took a closer look, and then another one saw it and stopped and took a look. And then a few of them stepped a little bit closer to it. And one of them then sort of turned its head around and looked behind to see if the others were looking at what he was doing. It was like he was going to steal it or something. And then just a bit curious and just sort of like nibble the lens of the camera just to sort of taste it or see what it felt like. It was just so funny to watch. I mean, I was about 15, 20 meters away just watching this whole thing unfold. And of course the camera was recording. So I've got some quite clear pictures of a penguin's tongue and throat. But they're so curious. And even if you don't really need to approach penguins, because I found that if you just lie on the ground low down, if you're below their eye level and you sit still, they just come over to you to see what you are and what's going on. And sometimes within just a foot. So it's actually quite easy to get close pictures without even having to make the effort of approaching them.
Yeah, wow. Okay, well, we're on the theme of birds. We're going to listen to your second song, which is Three Little Birds by Bob Marley and the Wailers. Why'd you select this one, Aniket?
Yeah, so this reminds me of back in 1994 and 1995, the BBC ran a TV series called Bird in the Nest. They did it for 2 years with Bill Oddie and I think it was Peter Holden, where they had sort of camera set up in lots of British nesting birds and followed their progress. And I loved it. It was a great series. And they played this song on one of their sort of compilations, of visiting all their various cameras. So I just associate it with that. And I think that's really what started my interest in birds specifically.
Aniket, before that song, you were telling a story about the penguin that almost gobbled up your GoPro. Is it risky using camera equipment in harsh environments?
It can be, yes, because I guess when you're working with wildlife, you're often out in the elements. And I found in some places, like traveling with camera equipment, it's almost like traveling with a baby. I mean, you've got to clean it and dry it and charge it and, really look after it quite well if you want it to perform well for you. I remember back in 2008, I had a bit of a disaster actually. It was in New Guinea. I'd been to a place called Wermon, which is it's a leatherback nesting colony, quite a remote colony. It's an 8-hour speedboat journey to get there. And I went with WWF, who had a camp there and were monitoring the turtles there, to do some work with them and also just to take some photographs and make some records there. And when we arrived, the speedboat anchored offshore. There was like a small wooden canoe that we used to ferry our equipment ashore. And the waves are really quite choppy. I always find actually in a lot of beaches where turtles choose to nest to really have quite rough sort of surf. But we got our equipment ashore, spent some time there. And then when we left several days later, the canoe had actually been smashed up by big waves.
Oh, wow.
So we didn't have the canoe to return to the speedboat. So basically we packed the stuff up, and so some of the guys from the team actually swam out to the boat with the stuff on their heads. I mean, these are really tough guys. Papuan guys are really tough. They're really made of the real stuff. I mean, I couldn't have done that, but they just made no effort of it, just swam out through these huge waves, carrying all the gear and loading it onto the boat. My stuff was last to go. And I had my main backpack and then my camera bag with all my electronics, my money, my passport, my Birds of New Guinea book, which I'd borrowed from Professor Philip Duffus, the head of the vet school. I mean, this is a priceless book. I think it was around $1,000 to buy secondhand at the time because it had
Oh,
been out
wow.
of print since the 80s by Bruce 𝗵𝗃. And he lent me a mint copy of this book. So this was also in the bag. And two guys went out carrying this stuff, and a freak wave just hit both of them, and both bags got knocked over and tumbled, just disappeared under the waves. And oh my God, my heart has never sank as rapidly.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And we managed to retrieve them and drag them out the water. And I lost one lens, was written off, and my camera body had some seawater damage and died about 10 days later. Most other things I managed to sort of clean up and salvage, fortunately. But I think seawater and sand are probably two of the biggest threats that you can face with electronic equipment. I'm certainly, much more cautious now. I carry a dry bag or a large bag that I can really waterproof my equipment from in case I'm getting on and off boats where there's that risk.
Yeah. When you're traveling, do you have like a stripped down kit that you take, or do you have to take a lot of stuff to be prepared for different situations and subjects that you want to try and photograph while you're traveling?
It really depends on the target subject and the location. I think, like many, I have a tendency to probably take too much equipment. It's probably better to actually take less and just focus on, certain things. I think sometimes if you try and do like bird photography and macro and video and underwater, you end up with so much equipment, you can't really focus on getting really good results in one area. Certainly if I'm guiding or leading a trip, I try to take less, just because obviously my focus is on the client. I just carry sort of maybe a zoom lens and one wide angle lens, and that's it. I normally carry about 3 or 4 lenses. When I'm working in islands, I can afford to carry more because I can leave most of it at home at my base, and then when I'm out for the day, just take a couple of lenses or whatever.
Okay. And do you like put it in like carry on, or do you take it carry on, or do you put it in the hold baggage?
I take most of it on carry on. I have a Tamarack camera bag. It's like a hiking rucksack, but it's specifically for camera equipment. So I open it up and it's just full of pockets for lenses and batteries and flash guns, and it's got a little laptop pocket at the front. So I take it on my carry-on. Occasionally, if I haven't got space, I might put things like camera chargers or binoculars or those kind of things in my whole baggage.
Yeah. How do you go with the weight with the cabin baggage, because you're restricted to a certain amount?
Yeah, that can be difficult as well. I mean, usually if it's a long haul destination, they tend to be fairly flexible. Sometimes I've just, if I think I'm a bit borderline, just put a few lenses in my pockets. You can even buy photographer jackets and vests, which are, bizarre really, but it's like a waistcoat, a tight fitting waistcoat that's just full of lens pockets.
Right.
So when you're traveling with a lot of camera equipment, you just put all your lenses in these pockets, and you go to the check-in desk with your almost empty bag and say, well, that's all my check-in luggage.
Yeah.
I've never used one, but they are available.
Yeah.
But I've never really had any major issues with that. One time I have run into a problem though was joining a ship up in Svalbard in the Arctic in 2012, and some of my equipment was checked in because I couldn't get it all into my hand luggage, and the bag didn't arrive, and the ship was leaving within a few hours.
Oh, right.
So I then had 2 weeks of not having any of my stuff, but fortunately I had my camera equipment and I managed to just get batteries charged up from someone else, so it was okay.
Yeah. Okay. Just going back to your island vet work a little bit, I know your last trip prior to COVID was to Pitcairn Island, which is quite remote as well. How did this come about, and how long were you there?
Yeah, so again, I'd had an interest in visiting Pitcairn for a little while. I'd been in touch with the island, and they were keen to have some, have a vet over there as well. So we sort of made a plan for me to just make a short sort of preliminary visit. I was only there for a few weeks on this particular visit. It was a chance just to get a feel of what's there and get started with some veterinary work, set up, some equipment and medicines and things to use subsequently. And I had some time to explore the island and take a lot of photographs and get to know the people there. So yeah, it was an enjoyable visit. And I think more so now, having returned from that trip, and having gone into lockdown, and COVID for the rest of the year, I'm actually really pleased that I fitted that in when I did.
Yeah, exactly. It's quite a small community there, isn't it? And I think one of its famous inhabitants are the Galapagos tortoises that were introduced quite a few years ago. How long have they been there? Is there still any around?
Yes. So yeah, you're right. It's a very small population. There's, I think, just about 37 islanders there now. It's, I think, the smallest population of anywhere in the world. And in terms of the tortoises, there's just the one now, Misty. So 5 were brought over from the Galapagos between 1937 and 1951 by Irving Johnson, who was a skipper of the Brigantine. And they were never very popular because they tended to raid the gardens. They especially like watermelons,
Oh, okay.
which they grow a lot of in Pitcairn. But she's the last survivor. She was known as Mr. T until they sort of figured that she was probably a female. So the name was changed to Misty. And I did manage to track her down. It took me the entire length of my stay. I found her a few hours before I was due to leave, actually, hiding under a lemon tree. And of course, we baited her with some watermelon, which just kept her in place for a while I sort of checked her over. And it's incredible. They're so big. And you think of tortoises as being so slow at moving and doing things, but she devoured half a watermelon in not very much time at all. Really remarkable. You think how big a watermelon is.
Yeah.
And she just chomped through it. But I gave her a check over. There was a concern before about her shell, but that actually looked pretty good at the moment. So she's looking really well. I mean, a relatively young tortoise in the grand scheme of things. I think she was probably quite young when she came over. So she's probably not even 100 yet. And considering some of the tortoises on other islands, like in St. Helena, are well over 100, she's potentially got many decades to go there.
Yeah, wow. I think we're going to listen to your third song now, Aniket, which is The Man on the Moon by R.E.M. Can you tell us why you picked this one?
So yeah, when I think of the title of that track and its direct interpretation of what it means, I mean, I just think of those black and white pictures of Neil Armstrong walking on the moon for the first time, which really makes me think of human progress and advancement and how rapidly we've come to where we are now, and how we've really managed to dominate almost every environment on Earth for our own benefit and perhaps maybe ultimately for our own demise. But it kind of really symbolizes human progress, whether progress is the right word or not. Again, open to interpretation, but that's why I chose it.
Aniket, I just want to go back to your love, for the want of a better word, of remote island vet work. I know one place that you've visited a few times, you have a very special fondness for, is the Tristan da Cunha Islands. What do you love about that particular island group?
Yeah, so I first went to Tristan in 2015. There'd only been 2 official veterinary visits before that. So it was largely like, a lot of things were like a clean slate. Everything hadn't been investigated and looked at before. So it made it very interesting from a veterinary perspective. But in terms of the island itself, as you probably know, it's one of the remotest in the world. Well, it is the remotest permanently inhabited island in the world, and has quite a fascinating history. And actually, being there, you really feel like you're in another dimension, because you've got this really long journey to get there. From the UK, the quickest you can do it is in about 10 days. The year before last year, when I went, it took me 3 weeks. And I think it's just the culture and the lifestyle there is actually quite nice. And it makes you realize how manufactured our lives are in the rest of the world. They only got telephones in Tristan, I think, about 15 years ago. Phone and internet. And internet is very slow. It's not like you can't sort of walk about and, on your phone and just go on like Google and stuff. You can send emails quite easily, but you can't surf the net that easily. And it's actually quite nice. I mean, people talk to each other, and you're not totally reliant on technology, but it almost feels like real living. There's no Starbucks or McDonald's or, I mean, people have jobs and things, but you come in from work and you go and dig your potatoes, or in the morning you go and milk your cow, and it's like living as we're meant to live. And life is more about needs rather than wants. If you need a wardrobe, you just get a wardrobe. I mean, you don't get like 3 IKEA catalogs out and flick through and get the size that you want and the color, and it's very simple. And I think people are a lot less judgmental. If you go into work and your shirt and trousers don't match, it doesn't really matter. It's not like over here where you're so self-conscious because, you're expected to do things differently, and you're always self-conscious of how you dress and how you look and what you do. And if you go out for dinner, you think, well, you go to the chocolate aisle in the supermarket and think, well, if I get these chocolates, I think I'm a snob. If I get these, I think I'm a cheapskate. These ones are inappropriate. These are, these aren't vegan. There's almost too much choice. And, I remember in Tristan, when I left the first time, I said to one of the shipping agents in Cape Town, I said, look, I need about a dozen boxes of chocolates to give people. Can you send me some across? He just said, yeah, what do you want? Small, medium, or large? I said, just medium is fine, just reasonably good ones. He said, fine. That's it. Yeah. That's all I had to say. And he just saw what was available, just sent me over a dozen boxes of chocolates and a bill, and that was it. And, people aren't that judgmental of which chocolates I got them because, people don't understand that things are hard to get there.
Yeah.
And that's actually quite refreshing. It's much more, you feel more relaxed.
Yeah.
And I think really, like for me, islands have become my comfort zone, really. I think that like there's city people and there's country people. And I think for me, like growing up on the edge of London and then sort of working and living for a while in rural parts of the UK and agricultural areas, I sort of liked both, but I wouldn't say they were completely my comfort zone. But islands really are. And it's I guess it's not for everyone, but it's one of those things I've just found kind of works for me.
Yeah, great. And how many people live on Tristan?
I think the population at the moment is between 230 and 240 thereabouts.
Okay.
And there's usually about a dozen or so contractors or expats there as well. So the administrator, doctor, a couple of teachers, then occasionally myself as a vet. So yeah, in total, maybe about 250 people.
It's got a bit of an interesting history from what I've read. Do you know a bit about the history of the island and the settlement?
Yeah, so there's actually 4 islands in total. I mean, Tristan is the only inhabited island, and then there's Inaccessible and Nightingale, which are about 20 odd miles away, and 𝗀𝗏 is a World Heritage Site, is a bit further away. It's about 220 odd miles away. The islands were discovered by a Portuguese explorer in 1506 and were named after Tristan da Cunha. They weren't actually settled and occupied until 14th of August 1816 when the British military arrived. And I think the reason was that the French Emperor Napoleon had been captured and exiled in St. Helena, and actually protecting him and preventing his rescue was almost like an obsession at the time. Right. That Tristan and I think Ascension as well were taken to prevent them being used as a rescue base, even though St. Helena is, it's about 4 or 5 days from Tristan even now. And in those days, it was probably longer. So this garrison was set up on Tristan, and Corporal William Glass was a Scot. Him and his family were there and decided to stay. And gradually over time, there were more additions to the community, and there were, I think, 5 bachelors there at one point in the 80s, in the sort of mid 1800s. They brought over 5 wives for them. There was an opportunity for, I think, 4 or 5 women from St. Helena to move to Tristan and join them. And that really was the start of the population, and of which today's population is descended.
Wow, very interesting. Now, you said it can take 10 days to 3 weeks to get there. And I'm going back on something we talked about a little bit earlier was the hazards of getting to the islands that you visit sometimes. And I remember you telling me a story that sometimes the boat doesn't stop and you've got to basically be prepared with all your gear and pretty much jump to shore as the boat keeps going.
So to get to Tristan, and obviously there's no airport or anything there, so you have to travel by sea. The way it works is that there's a fishing company in South Africa which has the contract with the island for lobster fishing, which is the main income there. So the island sells a license to the fishing company that comes to fish, and as part of that contract, they also take passengers and cargo. So essentially, they are traveling to fish with fishing crew, and they can take up to 12 passengers at a time. And it's usually around 7 to 8 times a year. I think it's been less during COVID. So actually a very small number of spaces for people to go to the island and leave. And if you factor in the number of islanders who need to leave for like medical treatment and that kind of thing, and then return home, there's actually a lot of competition for the few spaces available. Now, the sea conditions can be rough, and you need the right weather for landing. So that there is a sort of a built harbour there. The ship can't come into the harbour though; it anchors offshore, and then the smaller launches will come out to take passengers and cargo back. But the weather has to be just right for that. So sometimes you have to wait 3-4 days before you can even get off the ship.
Wow!
And I think the thing where the ship doesn't stop, they tend to be in emergency situations. If there's a ship passing across the Atlantic, so from Sao Paulo to Durban or something like that with cargo, and they're picking someone up in Tristan, they won't stop. They'll just keep going, and an island boat will go and join the ship and take a medevac with them or whatever. That happens in exceptional circumstances. But with the fishing boats, they come to the island and they will wait until there's a weather window for unloading.
Oh, okay. Now, you mentioned earlier about Inaccessible Island, which is one of the islands near in the Tristan da Cunha group. By the very name of it, it seems very hard to get to. And you've visited once or twice now. How did you get there? And can you tell us how you managed to get to an inaccessible island?
Yeah, so it's very well named. It is very difficult to visit and to land on and to climb up. It's a sort of a plateau. It's similar to Tristan in the sense that it's surrounded by quite steep cliffs, about 500-600 meters high, with a flat plateau at the top. There's 2 landing sites there. There's a waterfall and another site called Blendon Hall, which is a boulder beach, but it has quite a bit of swell there, and there's only very limited weather windows where you can actually land there. So the conservation rib that goes over every so often, I say every so often, quite rarely actually, but when it does, it has to stop offshore. And then what you typically do is you have a small, either an inflatable or a sort of small boat that you lower into the water with your equipment, and you paddle sort of to the surf, and then you climb out and drag the boat over the rocks, which is the hazardous part, because if a wave hits at the wrong time, it can capsize, your equipment can end up in the water. You actually put your stuff into a plastic barrel with a screw-on lid and then tie that into the boat, so it's protected, because waves like crash on top of your bags and everything, so everything's got to be protected. You have no phones in your pocket or anything electronic. Once you're ashore, it's okay. There's a little hut there where you can stay, and a fresh water supply, but there's only one narrow little gully to actually get up on top of the island. And back in 2015, I met a Canadian scientist, Greg McClelland, who was doing some work with RSPB, and he was keen to go over there to see how the Tristan albatross was doing. There's only been 1 or 2 pairs nesting up there for many decades now. Oh. And not many people have really been up the top to check on them since the 80s. So we decided we were going to go on top, and as I had a UAV with me, we were going to take the drone up there and use it to cover ground to see if we could find nests, because you need a huge amount of time to walk through the vegetation and look for the birds. So we had a first attempt. We cut the path to actually get up there, which took a day because no one had been up for a couple of years, so it was really overgrown. But when we got up there, we were just in the fog and the cloud, and you couldn't see anything. So we returned to Tristan the following day, and a few weeks later we had another weather window, so we went back again, and this time we had better weather. And we'd obviously cut our path as well. So we climbed up on the top. We did 5 flights. This was in the earlier days of drones, where you had a sort of a huge pelly case to carry up. There's none of these fold-up units that you have now.
Yeah.
And we took about 1,400 images. We spoke to some of the elder members of the community that gave us some information, and from the records as well, of where the birds had been nesting historically. So we focused on that area and just did transect flights up and down that area. I think we covered about a third of the area of the island with photographs.
Right.
And then scanned through them. And that was Greg's job, but he looked through 1,400 images, and then one of them he found a nest of a Tristan albatross, which we were absolutely thrilled about.
Yeah.
And we also saw a few adults and a few young birds. So we managed to make a sort of population estimate of sort of 6 to 9 birds at the time.
Okay. And how have these island groups been impacted? Of any in Australia, we've had massive problems, obviously, with introduced pest species affecting our unique mammal flora, fauna. Are Tristan da Cunha Islands impacted by invasive species at all?
So Inaccessible and Nightingale are both still rat-free.
Okay.
which is why the inaccessible rail still exists. In fact, I think flightless rails across the world have really been hammered by rodent invasions. But I think with inaccessible, the very nature of the fact that ships can't come in that close because of how it is, the fact it is so inaccessible has meant that ships have never come alongside.
Right.
Because there's never really been a proper sort of established settlement there, that risk has been a lot lower, and remarkably it's stayed rat-free to the present day. So, birds have really prospered there, as they have in Nightingale. Gough Island, which is where most of the Tristan albatross population lives, does have introduced mice that seem to have developed into super mice over the last few decades, and actually are devastating a large number of seabirds. I mean, thousands and thousands of birds are being killed by these mice every year. So there is an eradication program which has been delayed a couple of times, but they've started on it now, and it's due to be completed this year. And hopefully, following that, there'll be a real improvement in breeding success of some of these birds.
Oh, let's hope so. Okay, and again, we're going to listen to your fourth song now, Planet Earth Too Sweet. Have you got a bit of an affinity with the David Attenborough documentaries?
Yes. I mean, he was a big influence on me growing up and even now. But I was fortunate enough to meet Hans Zimmer, who composed this and did the score for Planet Earth 2. He was in Bristol at a film festival in 2018. And he's actually very passionate about conservation and the planet and the environment. And he was being interviewed by Edith Bowman and said something really quite powerful, which was that, in the future, generations will look back at their parents and grandparents and say, what did you do about the environmental crisis? In the same way as people in Germany today, with all the things that happened there during the Second World War, say to their parents and grandparents, what was your involvement in the war and things that happened over there? So, he really is quite passionate about the environment, and he's a great composer. So hence I chose this song.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit more about your photography side of things, and specifically your wildlife images. I've used a few of your images in some of the books I've done, and you've had other images published elsewhere, and specifically by media outlets. How do you promote your work? Is it advertised anywhere, or just for people that are interested in wildlife photography themselves or just getting into it? What have you found the best way to promote?
To be honest, I don't do very much at all. And I should do more. I wish I did more. I think in terms of being a successful wildlife photographer is almost as much about promoting your content and putting it out as it is about getting images and content. And the former is something I'm actually really bad at. I have used agencies a couple of times. So media agencies that distribute stories and content to the press, including photographs. It's a very competitive area. I've always been interested to get into stock, but I've never got into that. Most of what I publish is actually through word of mouth. I mean, just like the images that you used of mine, I think back in 2008 of the bowerbirds, just sort of via a mutual contact that that put us in touch because you were after those pictures. A lot of my pictures from the overseas territories are sort of requested directly, or if it's pictures that I've put in the Falklands Conservation newsletter and someone's seen a picture and they want to use it for something, so then they've got in touch with me through Falklands Conservation or that sort of thing. Happens quite a bit. The last bit I had published was actually a video clip, funnily enough, broadcast by Boris Johnson on his Facebook page.
Oh, okay.
He was announcing the new Tristan da Cunha Marine Protection Zone. And a friend of mine is his personal videographer. So, he just messaged me and said, I'm making this video and, I need some drone shots of the island, which I know you have. So can you send me some over? So, a lot of it is just things like that. But actually, there's a lot you can do. I did have a social media page where I used to, upload a lot of my photography, but I don't really do it very much now. It's something I think I'd keep meaning to try and get back into.
Okay. Now I know you're a Canon man. I'm a Nikon man. You're a Canon man.
Yeah.
And we'll never see eye to eye. But what sort of like cameras and lenses would you recommend to people that firstly that are starting out, but secondly as far as ease for travel?
Yeah, so I'm a bit old school, and I still have I shoot with a 5D Mark IV. It's a Canon DSLR. I know nowadays mirrorless has become all the rage. They're more compact and things like that. To be honest, I don't know a lot about mirrorless. I haven't got into that side of things. I would say if you can use at least a bridge camera or a DSLR is great, so you have some control. but actually you can do a lot and be quite creative even with mobile phones now. And I do use mine quite a lot for some forms of photography. I think don't worry about carrying too much equipment. If you're, whether you're on your local patch or you're overseas or whatever, try not to take too much equipment. It's better to have less equipment but of a better quality than have lots of equipment that isn't going to last you so long.
Right.
And also remember that most images you're going to be shooting in RAW, and you're going to be processing those images. So always bear in mind that if a lens has a bit of distortion, you can always correct that. You can always edit things, and certain things are fixable and certain things aren't. And that's really a normal part of your workflow. So I think it's often ignored. You can be very good at taking photographs, but not very good at editing, and vice versa. And probably the most important tip in nature photography is to only ever show your best work.
Right.
I heard a photographer say that at Wild Photos in London a few years ago, and actually it's so true. If you've got 1,000 images and you really want to show 100 of them, just take out the ones that aren't the best that you have, because it'll make the rest of your work look better.
I totally agree with that. And it doesn't matter how good a photographer you are, everyone takes bad pictures, everyone takes ordinary pictures, and everyone takes great pictures. It's probably just the frequency of the better pictures that comes with experience and time in the field. But I was listening to Morten Hilmer a few weeks ago, and he's saying he never deletes any of his images. And even though he might think that they're pretty ordinary, if they show some sort of behavior, someone might be interested in it. And I think it was either wolves or foxes or something he took a picture of, and he said he ordinarily would have just deleted it, but someone was studying that particular animal, and the behavior that they were taking part in at the time was something that they were looking at, and they bought images off him that he would have normally just chucked in the bin.
Yeah, it's certainly worth keeping it. You never know when an image is suddenly going to be of value or of use. It's the same has happened to me a number of times, actually. I mean, a couple of times I've taken photographs of people and have later found out that they've unexpectedly died, and then I've been approached because I had the only images of them. And I'm glad I took those pictures, because they were just pictures taken in passing while I was had my camera, and I just thought I'd take a picture of you. And also in Peru once, I was at a 𝗊𝗂𝗁𝗃, clay lick, where the macaws were feeding, and this little squirrel just came along the face of the cliff. I'd seen lots of these squirrels, but I thought I'll just take a shot of this squirrel, and it was in my collection. I just left it there. I never showed it to anyone. And about 10 years later, it was described as a new species, and someone was, I think it was some Polish scientists were writing a book about Polish discoveries, and it was a Polish scientist who had actually described this species of squirrel, but they didn't know where to find any photographs of it. So, and that picture was then published, but I took it completely accidentally, and I had never thought I would ever use that picture for anything. So there's definitely something to say for keeping everything you have, because you never know. I mean, unless it's just a write-off, but anything that's not your best work doesn't have to be deleted, but certainly worth hanging on to it.
Definitely. Now, a little bit more about your travels, Aniket. I know lots of people are in lockdown at the moment, and obviously traveling is very difficult. But when people are able to travel again, what are some of the secrets you can share about getting around to different places and maybe making the most out of their next wildlife photography trip?
Yeah, so I think I think the first thing I'd say is that you don't necessarily have to travel to see wildlife. I've actually this last year been photographing my local fox a lot, because it's become like a pet, and I see him every day, so I know him pretty well. But it can be exciting to go to a completely new place, a new environment, see completely different species. It can be a burden as well. It can be expensive, and you can't take all of your equipment with you, or you don't have quite the same freedoms as you have on your own patch. But one tip I would say, if you are making a long haul trip to see wildlife, is to try to go for as long as possible. Instead of doing sort of 3 or 4 very short trips of a week, it's better to just do, if you have the freedom to from your work and other commitments, to try and do a single longer trip where you can really get your teeth into somewhere and see the things you want, get the shots you want, and then not feel that you've missed something and you need to go back, just to be totally satisfied with that location. I actually, believe it or not, I actually hate flying. I can't stand being in planes. I'm actually quite fearful of it. So for my own purpose, if I'm away for my work, such as in the Falklands or in Pitcairn or whatever, what I tend to do is just have a layover when I finished and stay on for a week or two at the end and do my photography then and then come home.
Okay.
So it saves me doing a separate trip, saves the cost of that, obviously, reduces the environmental impact as well. It's much more efficient use of time, I find.
Yeah, awesome. How have you been occupying yourself during the COVID lockdown periods you've been experiencing there in the UK?
Yeah, so I mean, my work has been fairly steady. After the first lockdown, it picked up and has been pretty busy since. But I've got an allotment not far from my house here in Bristol, and I spend a lot of time there. And it's a great place. I mean, I love going there. I've got everything there. I was pretty self-sufficient through the first lockdown because I had so much growing there. It's such a large area. With all the time through 2020 as well, I managed to actually maintain it pretty well. I think I've got probably almost anything you can grow in the UK growing down there. It's just so satisfying and enjoyable. And it's becoming quite a fad in the UK now. It's probably one of my sort of older hobbies I started when I was quite young that I still enjoy today.
Yeah, well, you were saying about your fascination with the bean growing at school. So you're doing it yourself. You're out there growing your own beans and everything else.
Absolutely. And, I've actually my photography is actually turned very much to photographing plants and crops. I mean, their veg are pretty photogenic, quite colourful, quite nice to share with other people in all these gardening groups. And there's a lot of wildlife there.
And they don't move, the veg.
Yeah, exactly. They don't move. They stay where they are. You can put them where you want. And if you haven't got the shot, you just have another go the next day.
Yeah, that's right.
And there's a lot of wildlife there as well. I mean, we've got foxes, we've got lots of birds, there's newts and frogs and lots of flowers down there. It's just a great place.
Yeah, it sounds very therapeutic. Okay, can you introduce your last song to us and tell everyone why you picked it?
Yeah, so the last song is What a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong. This kind of really, I guess, in a way, describes my allotment in many ways. And when I'm there, I'm just in awe of just the simple, very nice things that on the doorstep, which I can enjoy every day. The plants, the flowers, the birds, the bees. It's just so peaceful there and green and just the perfect escape.
Okay, Aniket, thank you so much. I know it's very late over there and it's winter and it's probably chilly sitting in that flat over there. But no, it's been great, mate. I really appreciate you taking the time.
That's all right. Good to chat to you.